In this video, we're going to present a short introduction to pivot tables, one of the most useful yet underutilized features of Microsoft Excel when it comes to analyzing data. To illustrate the usage of pivot tables, I have here some partial data from the ongoing 2008 presidential primaries, up to and including the February 10th results. As you can see, it's pretty straightforward. We have the date and month for each primary, the candidates and their political affiliations, the state that held the primary, the percentage of votes and number of delegates each candidate received, and whether or not a candidate wins that state. So how do we go about deriving any useful analysis from the 300 or so rows of data? Well, Excel definitely gives us a lot of manual ways to tabulate and summarize the data, but in most situations, you'll find that pivot tables will do that pretty automatically. So let's try that out. Go to the Insert tab on the New Excel ribbon and select Pivot Table. The Create Table dialog comes up, and automatically you'll see that Excel has selected what it thinks is the data area you want, all the way to the last row of 309. That's perfect. You also have the option of inserting the pivot table into the current worksheet or a brand new worksheet. I prefer a new worksheet in general to avoid accidentally altering the raw data in the current sheet. So we'll choose that option and click OK to create the pivot table. Notice that each column has become a data field for us to work with. Now the term pivot table comes from the ability to pivot the data fields down the rows or across the columns in building your report. So if I wanted to list the candidates across the top, I can drag the candidate data field down to the column labels box. And if you want to pivot it to the rows instead, drag it to the row labels box. You can also just checkbox the data fields to bring them into the reporting area to the left, but I prefer dragging it because I can specifically tell Excel if I want it as a row or a column. Let's add some data into the report. For instance, I'd like to know how many delegates each candidate has received, so I'll drag the delegates data field down to the values box. That tells me Senator Clinton has tallied 922 delegates so far. I also want to group the candidates by the parties, so I'll drag the party data field down to the row labels box. Now at first it's not what we want because the parties are listed under the delegates. I actually want the reverse, so I'll drag the party field up above the candidate field. And now the result looks good. I also want to know how many states each candidate has won, so I'll drag the winner data field down to the values box. And I can see that Senator Clinton was victorious in 13 states. Now by default, Excel will want to sum up the data points for these columns, and that works most of the time like in these two instances. But occasionally you'll need to change that. An example would be the voting percentage one. It doesn't make sense analytically to add a percentage one from one state to another and have a meaningful conclusion, so we need to change how the value for this column is derived. Click anywhere in that data column and go to the Options tab below the Pivot Table Tools. Click on Active Field, Field Settings. You can see that currently it is defaulting to a sum operation. Let's say we wanted to know what's the most in voting percentage any delegate has received in any given state. That can be achieved by using the max calculation. Click OK to apply changes. You can minimize the top section here. You can see that Governor Romney has as much as 90% of the votes in one of the states. That, of course, is Utah if you have been following the primaries. So far, we haven't made use of the column labels. Before we do that, let me simplify the data view by leaving only the number of delegates column. Now we can break down the delegate counts by state, so I'll drag the state data field down to the column labels box. And we can see the numbers for each candidate per state. The columns can also have nested levels, so I can drag the month data field down as well. And now the states are grouped by the month in which they held their primaries. A few other notes on the design of the table. By default, there is a grand total column to the right and a grand total row at the bottom. You can control that and more by going to the Design tab under Pivot Table Tools. Go to the Grand Totals And let's say I don't want the right total. I can remove that. Also very useful is being able to alternate colors for the rows or columns to make reading easier. I can click on banded rows, for instance, to have that effect. I can also adjust the style for the table as well. Hopefully this is a good introduction to get you started in using pivot tables.